Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too, Joy Harjo wrote. Talk to them. Listen to them. They are alive poems. I went walking in my local woods this week. Alive poems were everywhere. I talked to the turtles, who have reappeared in the creek after several months of no sightings, the two medium-sized ones that emerged from a shady side of the stream and then disappeared back down in a cloud of mud toward the bottom. The large, hard-shelled and leathery brown-skinned turtle that studied me for a while, its face tilting up toward me as I spoke softly to it from the cliff, and then plunged under the water when I shifted my body. And the smaller, pale green, softer-shelled, paddle-footed turtle I see sometimes that I find the most enchanting, that paused its playful circling and seemed to look at me and recognize me, and then continued its meandering through the water, unconcerned about me. I observed how the redbuds, which I had been so delighted to see flowering in these woods before spring break, had peaked by the time we got back from our trip and are bare branched again, while the honeysuckle blooms have newly opened. I startled at the sight of poison ivy creeping up from the ground at the edge of the trail, a few inches from my bare leg. How quickly the reprieve of winter is over. I kind of hoped you wouldn't have poison ivy here in North Texas, but I guess that was wishful thinking. I listened to the high grasses rustling in the wind. In just a couple of weeks, they have overgrown the beautiful bright green ground cover I had known over the cooler months here. And most mysteriously, brown grasshoppers whirred through the tall bending grass with their kind of helicopter motions popping up before me and to the side of me. I watched one spring up from the dirt path and spin sideways 5 feet with such speed that I was surprised it could land elegantly on a stem already swaying in the breeze. The dance of being was all around me, viscerally, in these alive poems. Nature provides so many examples of the unfolding processes of life, in which the only constant is change of one kind or another. Today I begin an exploration of this dance of being, or perhaps I should say dance of becoming, from the point of view of process thought. We will continue this exploration over a series of reflections, with next week as the second installment, and occasional reflections picking back up on this exploration over the coming months. In Joy Harjo's poem, which you heard as the reading, she wrote, "Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe." It is the wind whose very definition is motion that knows the origins of the universe. The dance of being is at the heart of all reality. All life is in process. The Center for Process Studies offers an apt introduction, writing that process thought explores the dynamic nature of reality, emphasizing becoming rather than static existence or being. It also stresses the interrelatedness of all entities. Process thought describes reality as ultimately made up of experiential events rather than enduring inert substances. Terms that further characterize process thought are interrelatedness, unity and diversity, non-dualism, panentheism, mutual transformation, person in community, and pan-experientialism. So a lot of cool words there. We'll explore some of these in the future. Today I want to focus on the dynamic rather than static nature of reality as process thought understands it. The idea of reality as made up of processes, of course, is not unique to the relatively recent fields of process metaphysics, philosophy, or theology that took shape in the 20th century. I think back to when I began studying world religions as a college student and was drawn to the Tao Te Ching with its frequent use of flowing water imagery. There was something there that rang true to my experience. And it turns out many Unitarian Universalists in this century seem to share that affinity. One observer has noted that there is an intuitive process cosmology expressed by a large portion of Unitarian Universalists who might be process thinkers without knowing it, much as some of us were once UUs without knowing it before we got a belief net or wandered into a UU church and found we were home. Ideas similar to those found in process philosophy can be discerned in many cultures, including indigenous traditions like the one that Joy Harjo came from. In modern Western thinking, process thought was inspired by new understandings of science, particularly in the field of physics. It traces back to Alfred North Whitehead. Whitehead actually was a physicist before he turned his attention to developing process philosophy. He sought to take an idea of a process-based universe beyond the quantum level of quarks and atoms to the human and cosmic level. The key idea is that reality consists of a flow of events, the flow being more fundamental than the apparent stuff in it. What matters is not just the molecules of grasses and grasshoppers arranged as they are to form cells and organisms, but the process by which grasses grow, and grasses emerge from eggs and grow and molt and hop around in the grass, and the interrelatedness of grass and grasshoppers. Contrast this with the dualism that had predominated in the Western worldview since the time of the Enlightenment, where matter and spirit are understood as two opposite kinds of reality. The centrality of matter, of stuff, is kind of encoded in our language if you listen to it. Matter is what matters. The human mind or soul was considered to belong to a supernatural realm along with God. In this Enlightenment view, the science that followed focused on matter, the thinginess of reality. It explored a universe of machine-like objects from the scale of atoms to planets. Of course, we did not yet realize that the thinginess of things is something of an illusion, that even this hard podium is not solid at the subatomic level, but is made up mostly of space. The particles are dancing under our feet all the time, dancing in our own bodies all our lives. So instead of this Enlightenment dualism of matter and mind, process thought recognizes only a single natural realm. If there is a divine dimension to reality, a holiness throughout and beyond all that is, its laws are as natural as those of physics or ecology. And process theology sees everything in the universe as dynamic rather than mechanistic. Consider how Buddha regarded the mind as a process, a flow of thoughts, feelings, desires, in which repeating in patterns may emerge, but change is also possible. Likewise, medicine reveals that the body is continually recreating itself at the cellular level. We are all a set of walking processes. And we recognize the dynamic nature of reality perhaps most easily in the cycle of the seasons, the evolution of species, the birth and death of stars. The video that you saw projected during the reading in the interlude is called The Ancients at Australia's Spiritual Heart. Its creators described it as a saga depicting the spiritual communion of the oldest land in red Central Australia. You saw not only some of the seasons of the year in this time-lapse video, but creators say Australian icons that have existed from Devonian to Ediacaran ages, ranging from 359 to 635 million years old. The dance of being stretches back farther than the human mind, my mind at any rate, can really comprehend. My family went to Big Bend National Park over spring break, another place where the dynamic nature of reality is evident in the geology of the landscape. Although the wildlife is not as abundant there as in my local woods, there are still alive poems all around if you are paying attention. Forms and creatures that testify to events past, as well as new events unfolding before our eyes. We walked through Santa Elena Canyon, carved by the Rio Grande River over centuries, and I noticed layers of different minerals in the hard rock walls. A stripe of chalky white representing the compressed shells of sea life from a past eon. Another stripe of shiny black, maybe ancient plant life of another era. We hiked in the Grapevine Hills, a formation made by rising magma in the earth becoming entrapped by overlying sedimentary rock layers. The result was a field of giant granite-like boulders strewn on either side of the trail and piled into strange formations on the hills. Kids scaled the balanced rock near the end of the trail, where one great rock is lodged atop others to form a tall doorway that people can walk through. In the Chizos Mountains, we climbed down to a spot called the Window. There, at the point where rain from the surrounding mountains streams down, nears, and then pours off a cliff with increasing velocity after rain, the water has created silky, smooth rock. We also learned about the adaptation of plants and animals to the current desert conditions of West Texas. I have noticed a few yucca plants in Fort Worth since we got back from Big Bend. Like, oh, I know what that is now. But nothing like the forest of giant yucca trees that we visited in the Dagger Flats at Big Bend. Everywhere we went in that park, the processes put in motion by lava, water, wind, and adaptation were just as tangible as the rocks and the creatures all around us. This idea that life is a process, a series of overlapping, never-ending, interacting processes, that reality is dynamic and ever-changing. This may sound like something of a no-brainer when you look around at nature this way, with the eyes of a poet or a scientist. But recall how one of the seminal scientific ideas about change, the evolution of species, was so controversial when it was introduced. Darwin's theory bucked the prevailing idea of creation as unchanging and eternal in some big picture sense. But there's more to it than that. The aliveness of the alive poems all around us is not just in their dynamic movement. It's also in the experiences that entities feel. For in process thought, while material substances lose their place as the basic concept describing reality, what instead explains our dynamic world are feelings. Yep, feelings. Reality, in the process way of understanding things, is made up of droplets of feelings experienced by various individuals. Now, you may know that Unitarians have not always been known as an emotional people, so let's unpack this a bit. The Enlightenment, or Age of Reason, which influenced our tradition and still has a strong imprint on it, emphasized the power of rationality. But Alfred North Whitehead, the physicist turned philosopher who was the father of process thought, he believed the case for rationality had been overstated. He observed that people are only intermittently rational. But we can all bring personal experience to that statement. Instead of thought, he saw emotion and purpose as central to experience. As another commentator summarized it, the flow of felt emotion is this great ocean on which the thin layer of rationality precariously floats. Reason does play an important role in our lives, of course. We use it to make sense of what we see and what we experience, to infer cause and effect in events, for example. But Descartes had it wrong when he said, "I think, therefore I am." Thinking is not what makes up the bulk of even human experience. Our droplets of experience are filled with feelings and purpose. Moreover, Whitehead was describing experience at all levels of reality. In this view, electrons and protons are not best understood as tiny billiard balls, objects that knock into each other, but rather as bundles of experience. Bundles of experience. The attraction and repulsion that characterize experience at the subatomic and cellular levels also pertain to complex organisms like ourselves. We all have our likes and our dislikes, right? Don't some of us respond to the presence of sugar the same way that single-celled amoebas do? Maybe that's just me, I don't know. And if we see someone coming our way that annoys us, or maybe someone who even has hurt us in the past, how do we respond? Here they come. There we go. Such a basic feeling as desire or aversion is not limited to creatures, but may also describe particles. This idea of bundles of experience occurring from the level of protons all the way to the level of people is expressed in various ways. In people, of course, it's easy to speak of feelings, purpose, maybe even consciousness. We know ourselves to be subjects with internal experiences that are real. So, of course, when I walked down the Santa Elena Canyon, I had the feeling of enjoyment or pleasure in all of the beauty around me. I experienced a sense of curiosity about those stripes of chalky white and shiny black in the rock wall. And sharing this experience with my child and the rest of the family brought me great joy. What is perhaps more radical in process thought than the idea of you or me having such droplets of experience that make up our lives is the idea that entities as small as electrons have some kind of inner experience as well. That their experience, too, is made up of droplets of feeling. Writers may call this a type of sentience, or refer to the experience of particles as prehensions. That's what Whitehead called it. Not apprehensions, because there's no understanding going on, but prehension, the raw experience. Or simply feelings, or maybe even some call it proto-consciousness, recognizing that a proton is presumably not self-aware in the same way that humans are, or capable of having the same sort of complex feelings and sense of purpose that people do. Santa Elena Canyon, in that moment that I walked through it, reverberated with droplets of enjoyment, curiosity, and awe within me, and with whatever droplets of feeling the birds and insects and reptiles there were experiencing. And yes, even the attraction and repulsion occurring inside millions of particles in the canyon. Talk about an alive poem. This is what really made process thought click for biologist Charles Birch when he encountered this way of understanding reality. Instead of regarding his own mind and sense of purpose and feelings as epiphenomena, as some mysterious side effect of the way a mechanical brain works, the ghost in the machine, as mainstream biology would see it, process thought recognizes that those droplets of feeling are fundamental. And not only that, but the sense of kinship that Birch experienced with the life forms he studied, a recognition that other animals are sentient beings too, indeed that the whole world is more like a life than like a machine. That made perfect sense to him, and it makes sense within process philosophy. Sentience is not a problem to explain, as it is within a mechanistic worldview. It's the very nature, not only of human life, but all of reality. I look forward to exploring other facets of process thought with you in future reflections, continuing next week. The dynamic nature of life, full of unfolding events, and individuals at various scales of life having droplets of experience. This is just the beginning of our adventure into process thinking. For now, I return to the words of the poet, Joy Harjo. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them. Listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind. Remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember that all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember the dance that life is. I invite you to rise and body your spirit for our closing hymn, number 305, De Colores.